The world of Velcora was unlike any other. It shimmered under twin suns, its skies painted with violet and gold, and its cities carved from crystal and silver stone. The people who ruled it were known as the Vulpine, tall, elegant beings with fur that glowed softly in the light and eyes that saw truth where others saw only shadow. They lived by one rule above all others, the law of purity. The law was ancient, older than memory. It stated that anyone who entered a Vulpine city must bear themselves before the council, body and soul, to prove they carried no deceit, no hidden weapon, no shadowed intent. In their culture, to be seen without clothing was not shame. It was truth, the symbol that nothing was hidden. When Commander Ethan Vale, a human diplomat from Earth, arrived at the gates of Silverclaw City, he didn't know that this one law would test more than just his patience. It would test the very meaning of trust itself. He had come on a mission of peace. After decades of silence between the stars, humans had finally reached the borders of Vulpine territory, hoping to make allies rather than enemies. Ethan was chosen because he was known for calmness under pressure, for his quiet strength. But no amount of training could prepare him for what waited beyond the shimmering gates. As his ship landed, golden dust swirled around the landing platform. 2 Vulpine guards approached him, their movements graceful and quiet. They carried long plasma spears that hummed faintly in the air. Their eyes, golden and unblinking, studied the human before them. One spoke, her voice smooth but firm. "You are the one called Ethan Vale of Earth?" "Yes," he answered with a polite bow. "I come to speak with your council in peace." The guard nodded once. "Then you must obey our law. You must show yourself as all must, bare before the council, stripped of all deceit and cover." Ethan frowned slightly, not sure if he understood correctly. "You mean undress?" The guard said nothing, only raised her chin proudly and repeated, "By law of the Vulpine, none may enter clothed." For a moment, silence fell. The wind moved softly through the tall silver trees. Ethan felt the weight of their gazes pressing on him. His translator buzzed quietly, confirming he had heard correctly. He couldn't believe it. This was not symbolic. They truly expected him to stand naked before an alien council. And then, from behind the guards, another figure appeared. She walked with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Her fur was silver white, her eyes bright as dawn. Every Vulpine around her bowed slightly. This was Vera, the High Speaker of the Council, the voice of Velcora's will. Her gaze settled on Ethan, soft but firm. "Human of Earth," she said, "our law binds all. The body hides weapons, but the heart hides more dangerous things. We cannot welcome one who hides." Ethan stood tall, but inside unease rippled through him. He wasn't ashamed of his body. That wasn't it. But this was a matter of dignity, of understanding. He couldn't just strip before strangers for a ritual he barely understood. He took a slow breath. "Your law is sacred to you. I understand that. But on Earth, to undress before others is a private act. It isn't a sign of truth, it's a sign of vulnerability." Vera tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes studying him like a puzzle. "And is vulnerability not the same as truth?" Ethan hesitated. The question hit deeper than he expected. "Maybe, but truth is something you earn, not something you demand." Her ears twitched faintly, an unfamiliar expression crossing her face. None had ever spoken so to her. Most bowed, obeyed, and passed. But this human, he spoke calmly, not out of arrogance, but from conviction. The guards exchanged glances, uncertain. For the first time in many years, someone had questioned the law, not with anger, but with reason. The silence stretched long, heavy like the air before a storm. Ethan stood unmoving, his uniform catching the twin sun's light, his shadow stretching across the crystal floor. Finally, Vera stepped closer. Her voice softened, almost curious. "Tell me, human, if not by the body, then how do your people prove their honesty?" Ethan met her gaze. "By keeping their word. By standing firm when it's easier to bend. By showing respect even when they're afraid." The way he said it, steady, honest, carried no defiance. Only sincerity, and in that single moment something unseen stirred in Vera's heart. She couldn't name it then, but later, she would remember this human's eyes. The calm, steady glance that didn't beg, didn't boast. It simply said, "I am not your enemy. I am only asking to be seen." The wind brushed between them, carrying the scent of silver dust and new understanding. The guards waited for their command, but Vera didn't speak. For the first time in centuries, the law of the Vulpine wavered, not in defiance, but in doubt, and all because of one human's glance. The hall of the Silver Claw Gate was quiet. Every sound seemed to fade beneath the weight of the moment. The Vulpine guards stood still, their golden eyes watching the lone human who dared to question an ancient tradition. Ethan Vale stood in the center of the marble floor, the air thick with tension. He could feel every gaze on him, curious, cold, and cautious. He wasn't here to challenge their ways, yet his simple refusal had shaken something deep within their culture. Vera, the High Speaker, stood only a few steps away. Her silver fur shimmered faintly in the golden light. Her face showed calm, but her heart was unsettled. She had seen many beings come through their gates, merchants, warriors, nobles, but never had one looked back at her with such unflinching honesty. She took a slow step forward. "Human," she said softly, "do you understand what you are refusing?" Ethan nodded once. "I do, but understanding doesn't mean I can obey it." Her ears twitched slightly at his tone. He wasn't proud and he wasn't angry. He spoke as one who carried respect but also boundaries. Vera's voice remained calm, but a hint of steel entered it. "Our law is not made to humiliate. It was born from war, from betrayal. Long ago, our kind were nearly destroyed by those who hid lies beneath silk and steel. That is why we show ourselves before trust is given." Ethan listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. He could feel the weight behind her words, pain buried in history. "I believe you," he said after a moment. "But truth isn't always found in what's seen. Sometimes it lives in what you choose not to take from others." His words echoed through the hall like a soft wind. Even the guards exchanged uncertain glances. None had heard such a thing before. Vera looked at him carefully. "You think we take too much?" He shook his head gently. "No. I think you ask too much of the body when you should be asking the heart." For the first time in many years, Vera felt something stir, something she couldn't quite name. A quiet warmth behind her chest, a strange ache she didn't expect. His voice wasn't challenging her authority. It was reaching out to her understanding. But the guards didn't share her calm. One stepped forward, his tail lashing with irritation. "He mocks us, High Speaker. No one denies the law and walks free." Ethan didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides, his face steady. "I don't mock your law. I honor it by speaking honestly. Isn't that what the law of purity is meant to protect? Honesty?" The guard froze, uncertain. His ears flicked back. The logic was undeniable. Vera studied the human more closely now. His breathing was slow, his eyes calm and deep. She could sense no deception in him. Vulpine senses were sharp. They could smell fear, taste dishonesty in the air. But Ethan smelled of nothing but quiet truth and determination. Her heart felt heavy with conflict. The law was sacred. But this human's honesty, without ritual, without display, felt even purer than the ceremony itself. She spoke again, softer this time. "Ethan Vale, what would your people do if one refused your customs?" He thought for a moment. "We would ask why, and then we'd try to understand, because no trust can be built by forcing another to feel shame." Vera's eyes lowered for a second. Shame. The word struck her deeply. The law of purity had always been seen as noble, but what if to others it felt like humiliation? For a long moment no one spoke. The air trembled between silence and decision. The guards awaited their leader's command. Finally, Vera turned toward them. Her voice was quiet, but it carried power. "No blade has left his side. No deceit lies in his scent. The law asks for purity, and I smell no corruption in this man." The guards looked uncertain but obeyed. They stepped back slowly, lowering their weapons. Ethan blinked, surprised by her decision. "You're allowing me through?" Vera nodded once. "I am allowing you to stand as you are. But you will not yet enter the heart of our city. Not until I speak to the council." Ethan gave a small, respectful bow. "That's all I ask, for a chance to be understood." Vera held his gaze. Her golden eyes met his deep human brown, and in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of respect, perhaps even admiration. When Ethan was led to a waiting chamber, Vera remained at the gate alone. The suns dipped lower, casting long shadows across the silver stones. She watched his departing figure and whispered softly to herself, "Truth without flesh. Is such a thing even possible?" Her voice trembled with something close to wonder. For the first time in centuries, the law of the Vulpine had been questioned, not by force or arrogance, but by compassion and courage. And Vera, the proud high speaker, found herself uncertain not of her power, but of her belief. That night, under the twin suns of Velcora, the air carried a strange new scent across Silverclaw City. It was not the scent of defiance. It was the scent of change. The night on Velcora was quiet and soft. 2 silver moons floated above the shining towers of Silverclaw City, their light spilling gently through the high windows of the Temple of Purity. Inside, Vera stood alone. The temple's air smelled, faintly of incense and smoke, the same scent that had filled this place for centuries. She walked slowly toward the great stone altar, where the sacred flame burned blue. The fire never died. It had burned since the founding of their civilization. It was said to be the flame of truth, the symbol of the law that governed all Vulpine hearts. Yet tonight, even that flame seemed uncertain. Its light flickered weakly as if listening to her thoughts. Vera's mind was not calm. It kept returning to the moment at the gate, the moment the human spoke. His voice had been calm, not proud. His refusal was not rebellion. It was dignity, something pure in its own way. She had lived her entire life teaching that the body must be bare to show truth, that only when stripped of all cover could one stand honest. But Ethan Vale had stood, fully clothed, and somehow felt more open, more truthful than any she had ever seen. She closed her eyes. How could that be? The flame crackled quietly like a whisper. Her heart answered in silence. For a long time she had believed that their laws kept them strong. But now, for the first time, she wondered, had they also made them blind? A faint sound echoed behind her. She turned to see Elder Saren, an old Vulpine whose fur had turned pale gold with age. His eyes, sharp and wise, studied her with concern. "High Speaker," he said, his voice deep and rough. "The guards tell me of your hesitation today. You let the alien pass untested?" Vera bowed her head slightly. He showed no deceit. His words were clear. His scent carried truth. Saren's tail flicked with disapproval. "Truth without ritual is no truth at all. You know this." She looked at him quietly. "Do you truly believe that, Elder? Or do you only repeat what was told to you?" The old one's ears twitched. "You question the law?" "I question what it has become," she replied softly. "Once, the law protected us from lies. Now, it feels like it protects us from understanding." Saren frowned deeply. "You let one human shake your faith?" Vera turned back to the flame. "It is not his defiance that shook me. It is his honesty. I could feel it, Elder. He stood there and spoke like one who had nothing to hide, yet refused to obey blindly. There was no pride in him, only courage." The Elder's voice grew cold. "Courage is not obedience." "No," she whispered. "But sometimes obedience is not wisdom." Saren's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, High Speaker. Many before you have forgotten that our survival depends on unity, not change." When he left, the temple fell into silence once more. Only the soft hum of the sacred flame filled the air. Vera stood still, her heart heavy. She had always believed her people were wise. They prized logic, honesty, and tradition. But now, she saw how easily wisdom could turn into blindness when tradition was never questioned. Outside, a faint wind brushed through the crystal streets, carrying echoes of distant music from the lower quarters. The sound was peaceful, yet lonely. Vera looked toward the horizon where the human ship rested beyond the city walls. She could still picture him standing there, his hands steady, his eyes calm, his words echoing softly in her mind. Truth isn't always visible. Sometimes it's what you choose not to take from another. She sighed deeply. What if he is right? She murmured to the flame. What if truth is more than ritual? The blue fire flickered brighter, casting a warm glow across her face. It almost seemed to breathe in response, like it too was listening. At that moment, something inside Vera began to shift. It was small, just a seed of doubt, but it was also a spark of something greater. Hope. For years, she had thought the law made her people pure. But maybe purity wasn't about stripping away fabric. It was about stripping away fear. Fear of change. Fear of difference. Fear of being wrong. The realization stung, but it also felt freeing. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "If the law has become a wall instead of a bridge, then maybe it is time to rebuild it." Outside, one of the moons slid behind a cloud, and the temple dimmed slightly. But the flame before her grew taller, as if approving of her words. Vera gazed into it with quiet wonder. "Perhaps," she said softly, "the human came not to break our law, but to remind us why we made it." And as she stood beneath the silver light, the high speaker of Velcora felt something she had not felt in many years, the first stirring of change within her own heart. The next morning arrived quietly on Velcora. The twin suns climbed, slowly over the silver horizon, filling the city with a warm golden glow. The people of Silverclaw woke to whispers spreading through the streets, rumors of a human who had refused the sacred law of purity and yet had been spared by the High Speaker herself. Inside the great marble halls of the Council of Elders, tension filled the air. The chamber was circular, its walls covered in crystal mirrors that reflected every movement, every breath. The 12 elders stood in their places, their fur shades of gold and white, their eyes filled with age and pride. And at the center stood Vera, her expression calm though her heart felt heavy with unease. When Ethan Vale was brought in, the room fell silent. His human figure looked so different among the tall, elegant Vulpine, yet there was something about his presence, something unshakable, that made him seem at home even among strangers. He bowed slightly. "I come in peace," he said. An elder's voice, sharp as ice, cut through the silence. "Peace begins with obedience, human. You stand before the council clothed, though the law demands truth." Ethan met the elder's eyes without defiance. "If truth is what you seek," he said softly, "then test it another way. I will not dishonor myself to prove my heart." The elders murmured in shock. Such boldness would have been punished instantly if not for Vera's raised hand. "Enough," she said firmly. "Let him speak. The law says purity must be proven. It does not say it cannot be tested by another path." The oldest elder, Saren, turned to her in disbelief. "You would change the law? After 10,000 cycles?" "I would seek its meaning," Vera replied quietly. "If it cannot live in truth, then perhaps it has already died." Her words left the chamber breathless. Even Ethan could feel the weight behind them. Finally, Saren spoke again, his tone dark. "Then let us test the human by the circle of scent. If his heart is pure, he will not be found false." Vera hesitated. The circle of scent was no small test. It was an ancient ritual meant to reveal lies. No one, not even Vulpine, could stand within it without trembling. But she saw no fear in Ethan's eyes, only calm acceptance. "I will take your trial," he said simply. The council moved to the lower chamber. The floor was smooth black stone, marked with a glowing blue ring. Around it, smoke rose from bowls filled with sacred herbs. The air shimmered with strange energy. Ethan stepped inside the circle. The scent was sharp, almost electric. He could feel the heat on his skin, but he didn't flinch. Vera stood before him, holding the ancient staff of truth. "You must answer 3 questions. Each word you speak will reveal your scent. Lies will smell of ash and decay. Truth will carry no mark. Are you ready?" He nodded. "I am." Her voice softened, but the weight of tradition filled every word. "Why have you come to Velcora?" Ethan took a deep breath. "To build peace, to learn from you, not to take from you." The smoke moved gently, carrying a scent like clean rain. No sign of deceit. The elders exchanged looks of surprise. Vera continued, her tone quieter. Do you fear us, human? He hesitated only a moment. Yes, he said honestly. I fear what happens when fear itself is not understood. I fear that we may fight not because we must, but because we don't listen. Again, the smoke stayed clear. The truth was pure. Even the oldest among them could smell it. Vera's heart began to race. The human's honesty was not only rare, it was powerful. He spoke not as a diplomat, but as a soul reaching for understanding. Then came the final question, the one she had not meant to ask, but could not stop herself from speaking. Do you believe we are wrong? Ethan looked straight at her, his eyes calm and kind. No, he said softly. I believe you are trying to protect what you love. But sometimes, protecting too tightly can keep others away from it. You aren't wrong. You're just afraid to lose what makes you pure. The room went silent. The smoke stilled completely. No trace of falsehood filled the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. The elders stared at him, their golden eyes wide. The ancient test had never been passed by one who questioned their ways. Vera lowered the staff slowly, her heart heavy with emotion she could no longer hide. The trial was complete. The circle finds no deceit, she said quietly. His truth stands. A ripple of murmurs filled the chamber. Some elders bowed their heads in respect, others turned away in disbelief. But Vera looked at Ethan, and for the first time in her life she felt something break inside her. The wall between duty and feeling, between law and compassion, began to crumble. She realized then that truth did not live in tradition. It lived in the courage to face change. Ethan stepped out of the circle, his expression gentle. Now you've seen me, he said softly. Not my skin, my heart. Vera couldn't answer. Her throat felt tight. The human had done what no ritual could do. He had reminded her what honesty truly meant. And as the council chamber fell silent once more, the flame of tradition flickered, like a candle touched by the first breath of a new dawn. The air inside the council chamber felt heavy, as if time itself had stopped. The glowing smoke of the circle of scent slowly faded away, leaving behind a quiet stillness. Every Vulpine eye was fixed on the human standing in the center. Ethan Vale stood there calmly, his breathing steady, his face calm yet full of emotion. He had passed the trial without fear, without deceit. The scent of his truth still lingered in the air, pure and unbroken. But it wasn't the elders who broke the silence first. It was Vera. She looked at him, her golden eyes wide and uncertain. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of the law, believing it was the path to purity, the foundation of trust. And yet in this one quiet human, she saw something stronger than any ritual she had ever known. When she looked at Ethan, she didn't see rebellion. She saw truth without force, and that truth moved her heart in a way nothing ever had before. Ethan finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. You see, truth doesn't need to strip away dignity. It needs to be shared, not demanded. Vera's ears flicked slightly. His words weren't poetic or complex, but they felt like they reached deep inside her chest and pulled at something she had buried long ago, a longing for understanding. Around them, the elders whispered angrily. One slammed his staff against the floor. Blasphemy. This is manipulation. No outsider should question our sacred ways. But Ethan didn't react. He simply looked at them, his gaze steady and calm, the same gaze that had disarmed warriors at the gate. It wasn't pride, it was respect. He stood tall not to defy them, but to show them he would not hide. Vera raised her hand, silencing the room. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were strong. No scent of deceit lies upon him. You all felt it as I did. The circle cannot be fooled. The old elder snarled. Then perhaps the circle itself is broken. Her eyes hardened. No, she said firmly. The circle is not broken. Our understanding of truth is. A deep murmur spread through the hall. The elders turned to one another, tails twitching with unrest. No one had ever heard a high speaker question the law so openly. Ethan watched in silence, his hands at his sides. He didn't interrupt her. He knew this moment wasn't his. It belonged to her people, to her heart. Vera stepped forward until she stood only a few steps away from him. She looked up at the human, studying his face closely. There was strength there, yes, but also kindness, and honesty she could almost touch. "You do not fear us," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Not anymore. I feared being misunderstood. But now I see there's more courage in your people than I imagined." Something in his voice, gentle and sincere, made Vera's chest tighten. For a moment, the great hall around her disappeared. There were no laws, no councils, no titles, only her and him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And yet you defied our most sacred law." "I didn't defy it," he said. "I only asked if truth could exist beside mercy." The words hit her harder than any argument could. She lowered her gaze, feeling a strange warmth in her heart. Mercy. How long had her people forgotten what that word truly meant? The elders called her name, demanding she end the trial, but she couldn't look away from the human standing before her. His eyes were different from any she had ever seen, filled with compassion, steady and kind, and in that one glance something in her heart shifted. For centuries, the Vulpine had looked at outsiders with suspicion. They had believed purity came from control, that truth came only through exposure. But now, standing before her was proof that truth could come clothed, quiet, and still shine brighter than any ritual flame. The council waited for her command, but Vera did not speak. She could only feel the pulse in her chest, the warmth in her hands, and the sudden realization that this human had changed something inside her forever. Finally, she turned toward the elders. Her voice trembled, but her spirit was unbroken. "You call him impure. Yet his honesty humbles even me. What does that make us if we cannot see truth unless it kneels naked before us?" The question cut through the air like lightning. None dared to answer. Ethan lowered his gaze respectfully, his tone soft. "I didn't come to change your ways. I only hope to show you that respect can exist even in difference." Vera stared at him for a long moment. Her golden eyes glistened with something new, something rare for a high speaker. "Emotion. You've done more than that," she whispered. The room remained silent, the smoke still faint in the air. For the first time in the long history of Velcora, the law of the Vulpine stood uncertain, not because of rebellion, but because of understanding. And as Vera's gaze lingered on Ethan, she knew one truth that no ritual could ever reveal. Sometimes a single human glance could shake the foundation of an entire world. The night after the trial was silent, almost too silent for Velcora. The moonlight poured through the crystal towers of the Vulpine capital, soft and silver, painting long shadows across the temple courtyard. The air carried the scent of dust, rain, and uncertainty. Vera stood on the balcony of her chamber, her robe fluttering in the soft wind. She could still hear the echoes of the council's outrage, the furious whispers that followed her decision to spare Ethan. By their old laws, she should have punished him for refusing the right, but she hadn't. Because when she looked at him, she saw something purer than obedience. She saw truth without fear. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock at her door. "Enter," she said quietly. Ethan stepped inside, his boots leaving faint marks on the marble floor. He looked different in the soft light, less like an alien and more like a man caught between two worlds. His eyes met hers, steady as always. "I didn't mean to cause you trouble," he said softly. She turned toward him, her tail twitching slightly. "You didn't cause trouble, Ethan. You caused questions." He smiled faintly. "That sounds dangerous here." "It is," she admitted. "Our people don't like questions. They like answers carved in stone." Ethan walked closer, stopping a few steps away. "Then maybe the stone needs a crack." Her ears twitched at his words. There was something strange about humans, she thought. They were fragile, soft-skinned, but their hearts carried fire. He had spoken against their most sacred custom and still stood tall, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. For a moment, neither spoke. The night breeze carried only the sound of distant bells. Finally, Vera asked, "Why did you come here, really?" "You could have stayed silent. Agreed to our ways. No one would have questioned you." He looked at her, eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Because silence isn't respect. It's surrender." The word struck her deeply. Her breath caught, and she felt her chest tighten with emotion she didn't understand. Her entire life had been about following rules, protecting her people's honor, keeping the purity of truth alive. Yet this one human was showing her that truth didn't always need chains, it needed courage. Your people think truth is something fragile, he continued softly, something that breaks if you don't control it. But the truth, I know, it grows stronger when shared, even with differences. Vera looked away, her golden eyes dark with thought. If only my council could hear you without anger. They will, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Or maybe they won't, but someone already has. Her gaze snapped back to him. You mean me? He nodded gently. Yes, you. For the first time, she couldn't find words. The warmth in his eyes, the kindness in his tone, it melted the walls she had built around her heart. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, the desire to believe in something beyond duty. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scars on his hands, the small lines of a man who had lived through struggle, not privilege. You risked your life for a belief, she whispered. And you did it without pride. That's rare, he smiled faintly. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't dying for truth, it's living it every day. Her heart trembled. The moonlight painted their faces in silver glow. In that quiet moment, she realized that something had shifted between them, not just respect, but a silent bond. Outside, the bells rang again. A messenger arrived below the balcony, shouting breathlessly, High Speaker Vera, the council has called an emergency session. She looked down, her expression tightening. They move quickly, she murmured. Ethan frowned. Are they angry? Yes, she said. And afraid. Afraid of what they don't understand. He took a slow breath. Then I'll stand beside you if they'll allow it. Her eyes softened. They won't. Then I'll stand anyway. The quiet conviction in his voice made her heart ache. She had lived her entire life surrounded by loyalty, but never had anyone spoken with such simple, fearless faith. Vera stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Ethan, if they call for judgment again, they may not stop at words. He met her gaze calmly. Then let them see what truth looks like when it stands without fear. For a moment, neither moved. The night air wrapped around them like a fragile secret. Two beings from different worlds, one bound by law, the other by conscience, stood together under the same moon, not as judge and prisoner, but as kindred souls. Vera felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. Yet for the first time she didn't feel crushed by it, she felt alive. As Ethan turned to leave, she whispered after him, Your glance that day when you refused to bow, it changed something in me. He paused in the doorway, his voice soft. And maybe it changed something in all of us. The door closed gently behind him, leaving Vera alone with her thoughts. She looked out over the silent city and whispered to the wind. By law of the Vulpine, truth was meant to strip away the mask. But perhaps in this time it helped us see our hearts instead, and somewhere deep inside she knew the law would never be the same again. The great council hall of Velcora had never felt so heavy with silence. The 12 elders sat upon their crescent thrones, their golden fur lit by the soft fire of the ritual lamps. The air was sharp with tension and fear. Word of Vera's defiance had spread through every den and street. Some called her a traitor, others whispered that she had seen a new truth. In the center of the marble floor stood Ethan Vale, hands bound, yet unbowed. He looked tired but calm. His eyes were steady, just as they had been during the trial days ago, and above him, standing at the high platform, was Vera, the High Speaker who had once upheld every law without question, now standing between her people and the man who had changed her soul. An elder rose, his staff striking the ground with a loud crack. Vera of Velcora, you stand accused of breaking the law of truth. You allowed an outsider to mock the right. What defense can you offer before your people? Vera took a deep breath. The weight of the world rested on her shoulders, but her voice did not tremble. My defense, she said softly, is the truth itself. The hall stirred. Her golden eyes swept over the crowd. Elders, guards, citizens, all watching in silence. We built our laws to keep deceit away, but in doing so, we forgot compassion. We stripped truth of its heart. An elder scoffed. And you think this human has compassion greater than our law? Her gaze turned to Ethan. He refused our command, yet he spoke with honesty. No fear, no hate. Tell me, is that not the essence of truth? The room murmured again. Many looked at the human, confused. His calm presence was disarming. No arrogance, no defiance, just quiet understanding. Vera stepped down from her place and moved closer to him. This man stood before our ancient right and proved something our ancestors never imagined. That truth can exist without shame. She turned toward the council once more. If our laws demand that we humiliate others to see their honesty, then perhaps we have lost sight of what truth truly means. The eldest among them growled, his fur bristling. You speak rebellion. Vera met his stare. No, she said gently, I speak renewal. The crowd gasped. Never before had a high speaker challenged the sacred code so openly. Ethan raised his voice then, quiet but firm. I never wanted to dishonor your people. I only wanted to understand them, and I wanted them to understand me. I don't see enemies here. I see hearts waiting to be heard. His words carried through the chamber like ripples in still water. One by one, faces began to soften. Not all, but enough. A young guard spoke from the side, his tone hesitant. High Speaker, if the law can be changed, will truth still guide us? Vera looked at him kindly. Truth will always guide us, but it is not the law that gives it power. It is us. The eldest elder slammed his staff again. And if we fall into deceit without it? Then we learn, she said quietly. We learn, and we grow stronger. The elder stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he looked away. For the first time in centuries, no one had an answer stronger than hers. Silence followed. A silence that felt different, less like fear, more like awakening. Finally, the eldest elder spoke again, his voice low. By right of council the law of truth shall stand, but with change. No longer shall the right demand the stripping of form. Instead, truth shall be measured by courage of heart. A wave of whispers and gasps filled the room. The ancient law was rewritten, not by power but by a glance, a choice, and a voice that refused to bend. Ethan bowed his head, relief soft in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. But Vera shook her head. No, human. It is we who should thank you. You showed us that truth does not need fear. It needs understanding. For a moment they stood, there 2 figures from distant worlds surrounded by the quiet hum of change. The dawn light began to creep through the high crystal windows, bathing the hall in gold. Ethan turned to leave, but Vera stopped him with a hand on his arm. Where will you go? She asked softly. He smiled faintly. Wherever truth needs a voice. Her tail flicked gently, a gesture both fond and proud. Then wherever you go, the heart of Velcora will walk with you. He paused, meeting her gaze one last time. There was no need for more words. The glance they shared spoke of respect, of connection, and of something deeper, an unspoken promise that neither would forget. As Ethan walked out into the rising light, the Vulpine guards lowered their weapons, bowing their heads slightly. Not in submission, but in gratitude. Vera watched from the steps of the council hall as the sun rose over the spires of Velcora. Her people were awakening, not just to a new law, but to a new way of seeing. She whispered to herself, by law of the Vulpine, I once believed truth required sacrifice, but a human's glance taught me it only needed compassion. The wind carried her words across the city, soft as the morning light. And from that day onward, the law of the Vulpine was remembered not as a symbol of shame, but as the day one human gaze reminded an entire world what it truly meant to be honest.